Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The room hummed with the low static of projectors, maps glowing faintly on the wall, but no one looked her way. They shuffled papers. They exchanged glances. They leaned in toward one another, voices hushed, almost conspiratorial. She sat straight-backed, hands folded, her nameplate a small rectangle of authority no one seemed willing to acknowledge. Maybe it was easier for them to pretend she wasn't there. Her uniform carried the same insignia. Her years of service matched or exceeded most of theirs. But she had walked into this room marked by something they didn't speak aloud. A silence followed her like a shadow. And in silence, dignity was either suffocated or sharpened into something unbreakable. She let them talk. The colonel cleared his throat, tapping the edge of a folder. We move at 200, a small strike team, the compounds lightly guarded. Lightly guarded, she almost smiled. Words like that never lasted long in the field. Her eyes flicked to the wall, to the grainy satellite image pinned up. A square of desert stone, fences snaking like wire veins, a single road curling into nowhere. And somewhere in that labyrinth of walls and dust, a target they hadn't spoken aloud yet. They didn't have to, she knew. When they finally dismissed, chairs scraping, voices low, no one met her gaze, except one. A younger sergeant, freckles dusting his face, hesitated by the door. His lips parted as if to say something, then he thought better of it. He looked down, walked out. She stayed seated, hands still folded, heart steady. Because there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The air outside bit with desert chill. She pulled her jacket close, boots crunching gravel. The stars spilled across the night like broken glass. She found herself pausing at the edge of the motor pool, staring at them. Was he looking at those same stars once, years ago, before it all went wrong? Her brother's face ghosted in her memory. Younger, restless, with that same defiance she now carried like a scar. He had disappeared into these lands years before, into the shadows of war, swallowed by choices no one spoke about. Official records said nothing. Whispers said everything. And now, by some cruel twist, the mission map pointed to the same province. The same desert roads, the same stretch of silence where he had vanished. That was the truth she hadn't told them. The operation wasn't just another mission. For her, it was a return. She sat alone in the barracks, cleaning her rifle. The sound of metal on cloth, steady, rhythmic, filled the small space. Others played cards in the far corner, laughter muffled, careful not to reach her. She didn't mind. Solitude had long been her companion. But when the young sergeant, the freckled one, finally sat across from her, she looked up. His hands fidgeted on his knees. "Ma'am," he began, cautious, "permission to ask something." She raised an eyebrow. "They say you don't talk much," he flushed. Not that you should, just I mean why." She studied him. Most would have walked away from that question. He hadn't. "Because words don't keep you alive out there," she said softly, running her finger along the polished barrel. "Listening does." He nodded slowly, as if memorizing the weight of it. There was a beat of silence, then he leaned forward. "You ever get scared?" Her cloth stilled against the steel. She thought of nights when fear had pressed against her ribs so hard she couldn't breathe. Of letters half-written, never sent. Of waking in sweat, his name still on her lips. She let the silence hang heavy, then whispered every time. His shoulders dropped. A relief, maybe, that she wasn't carved from stone after all. He left her to her cleaning. She watched him go, a small crack of humanity in the otherwise solid wall of her night. At 200 the convoy moved. Engines growled, lights blacked out, the desert swallowing sound. She sat in the back of the lead truck, rifle across her lap, eyes closed but awake. Every bump in the road echoed through her bones. She thought of her brother again, of how he had written once years before he vanished. "You don't have to understand me, just know I'm not lost, not really." She had never believed him. When the convoy stopped, the silence pressed heavier than before. Wind scoured the sand. The compound loomed ahead, jagged against the horizon. She stepped down, boots sinking into dust. Orders came low, sharp. Teams split, shadows peeling away. She moved with precision, every motion drilled, automatic, but inside a knot tightened. Because as she stared at the walls ahead, she realized something. This wasn't about the mission, not really. It was about whether, in the ruins of a place like this, she might finally find the truth. And whether she was ready to face it. The breach was swift, too swift. No gunfire, no alarms, just the creak of a metal gate, the soft crunch of boots. A dog barked once in the distance, then went silent. She raised her rifle, sight sweeping, pulse steady. Hallways stretched like veins through the stone, shadows twitching with every movement of the team. Her radio crackled, then hissed back into static. Clear. Clear. Every voice said the same, too easy. She pushed deeper, heart tightening with each corner. Dust clung to her throat, metallic with age. She brushed a hand along the wall, cold stone, no heat of life. And then, a door heavy, locked from the outside. Her breath caught. Why would anyone lock a room from the outside? She gestured for cover, knelt low, fingers steady as she worked the latch. The door creaked open, slow, air rushing stale and sour. And inside, she saw something she hadn't prepared for. Not weapons, not maps, not even prisoners. But photographs. Dozens, maybe hundreds, strung on wires across the room. Faded, curling at the edges, lit by a single dangling bulb. Faces stared back, some strangers, some soldiers, and one. Her throat closed. Her brother. She stumbled forward, the room spinning, her glove brushing his frozen smile. The photo was old, creased, the ink nearly gone, but it was him, no mistake. She pulled it free with trembling fingers. He had been here. He had lived in these walls, walked these halls, and someone had marked his face, a small red circle scrawled over it. Why? She turned, heart hammering, eyes sweeping the room. Her team crowded the doorway, confusion etched on their faces. No one spoke, not yet. Because even without words, they understood. This mission wasn't what they thought it was. And she wasn't here just for duty. Her hand shook slightly as she slid the photo into her pocket. The others were waiting, staring. The colonel's voice came through the comm. Report. She pressed the radio. Her voice was steady, though her chest burned. Compound empty, but something's wrong. The words sounded hollow, even to her. They didn't capture the truth. They couldn't. The young sergeant stepped closer. His eyes darted from the photographs to her face, then back. His lips moved as if he wanted to ask, "Do you know him?" But he didn't. Not here. Not now. Instead, he whispered, "Ma'am, what is this place?" Her reply caught in her throat. She could only shake her head. Because the answer felt like the beginning of something far bigger. Something she wasn't ready to say aloud. When they finally pulled out, the night air was heavier than before. The compound shrank into the desert behind them, but the weight of it didn't leave her chest. She sat in silence, fingers pressed against the pocket where the photo hid. The stars glittered above, indifferent, eternal, and she thought of her brother again. Not the ghost he had become, but the boy who once laughed at the simplest things, who carved his initials into the fence behind their childhood home, who vanished without goodbye. And she asked herself a question she had avoided for years. If he had lived here, if he had been circled, marked, what had he become? And was she prepared for the answer? That night back at base, sleep did not come. Every creak of the barracks felt like footsteps. Every shadow stretched too long. Her mind played the image of the red circle again and again. Targets were circled, enemies were circled. Not brothers. Not him. But the ink was there, and someone at some point had drawn it. She closed her eyes, hand pressed against her pocket, whispering words no one else could hear. "I'm coming for you, one way or another." And for the first time in years, she felt something burn behind her ribs. Not fear, not duty, but the dangerous spark of hope. Why did no one mention the photographs in the after-action report? The colonel's voice was clipped, clinical, as if the compound had been nothing more than empty rooms and sand-choked corridors. He spoke of cleared sectors, secured perimeters, enemy absence, but not a single word about what they had seen behind that heavy door. Not a word about the faces staring back. Not a word about the red circles. Not a word about her brother. She sat at the edge of the debriefing room, hands locked together under the table, her expression carved from stone. The sergeant with freckles kept glancing her way, jaw tight, but he stayed silent too. She understood why. Some truths had a weight that could crush anyone who dared to speak them aloud. Still, the omission burned her. The colonel flicked through slides on the screen. "We'll regroup in 48 hours. Intel suggests another site deeper inland. This time we'll be prepared." Prepared, she wanted to laugh. Prepared for what? More empty hallways, more secrets buried in shadows. When the meeting dissolved, boots shuffling across the floor, she stayed seated. Again. The colonel passed her on his way out, eyes fixed ahead. He didn't acknowledge her, didn't stop, didn't even slow. And that silence told her something more dangerous than words ever could. He already knew. She walked the base perimeter that night, the desert wind tugging at her jacket, grit stinging her cheeks. Towers loomed overhead, their spotlights cutting pale circles into the dark. Somewhere far off, a generator hummed. She needed to think. Her hand brushed the photo in her pocket, worn edges catching on her glove. She pulled it out, held it close under the stars. His face was younger than the last time she had seen him, but not by much. Same crooked grin, same stubborn eyes. She whispered into the night, her breath frosting. "What did you do, Alex?" No answer came, of course. Only the wind carrying its dry, ancient voice across the sands. By morning, whispers spread, not about the photographs, about her. She felt it in the hallways, in the way conversations stopped when she walked past, in the glances traded between soldiers who had never dared look her in the eye before. She caught fragments, kept something hidden. Not all in the report. She knows more than she lets on. Gossip traveled faster than truth in places like this. At chow, the young sergeant finally sat across from her again. His tray clattered against the metal table, too loud, too deliberate. He leaned forward, voice low. "You saw it too." She didn't answer. "The photos," he pressed. "Why leave them out? Why didn't anyone?" "Because silence is safer," she cut in, her tone flat. "For who?" His voice cracked, the question sharper than he intended. He glanced around, lowered his tone again. "That was someone's wall. Someone collected those faces for a reason. Don't you think we should?" She fixed him with a look, not harsh, just steady. "Careful, Sergeant, some questions don't want answers." But he held her gaze this time. His freckles stood out more in the harsh fluorescent light, his youth too raw to hide. "With respect, ma'am, I think you want them as much as I do." For a moment, she almost broke, almost told him everything, that one of those faces had been hers to remember long before this war, that she wasn't just another soldier pulling a trigger for orders. Instead, she pushed her tray away, untouched. "Eat your food, Sergeant." She walked out, leaving his silence trailing behind her. Orders came down at dusk. They were moving again. The convoy rolled through the night, engines rumbling, headlights smothered in blackout. She sat in the back, rifle across her knees, staring into the void beyond the glass. The young sergeant was in her vehicle this time. She didn't look at him. Didn't have to. His questions hung in the air between them, louder than the roar of the tires. "Ma'am," he murmured finally, so quiet the others couldn't hear. Who was he? Her breath froze. He knew, not everything, not yet, but enough. He'd seen her hand slip into her pocket too often, seen her eyes linger on the photo one heartbeat too long. She didn't answer. The desert swallowed the question whole. The second compound wasn't empty. Gunfire cracked the silence the moment they breached. Bullets sparked against stone, ricocheted in the dark. She pressed to the wall, breath steady, barrel sweeping with precision. The air reeked of cordite and dust. Shouts in a foreign tongue bled through the chaos. Her squad pushed forward, voices sharp over the radio. Left flank secure. Watch the stairwell. Her rifle barked once, twice. Two silhouettes dropped in the corridor ahead. She advanced, steps measured, eyes scanning. The young sergeant was at her side, his movements sharp but raw, nerves bleeding through his trigger pulls. "Stay close," she ordered. They cleared room after room, the compound unraveling in bursts of violence and silence. When the last shot faded, the quiet returned too quickly, too heavy. But it wasn't over. In the heart of the compound, behind another locked door, they found it. Not photographs this time, files, boxes of them, stacked against the walls, coded and stamped. Soldiers rifled through them, muttering under their breath. Names, locations, operatives. And then she saw it. A file with her brother's name. Her hand shook as she reached for it. The paper was worn, edges yellowed, but his name was clear. Beneath it, words she never thought she'd see. Acid. Not prisoner, not enemy. Acid. Her knees nearly gave. The colonel's face darkened when they returned. He didn't ask how they'd secured the files, didn't ask about the firefight or the casualties or the details that usually filled an after-action report. His only question was simple, cold. Who touched them? The soldiers glanced at one another, silence stretched. Finally, she stepped forward. I did. His eyes narrowed, weighing her like stone. He didn't argue, didn't reprimand, just dismissed the room with a flick of his hand. When the others filed out, he stopped her with a word. Stay. The door shut, the room shrank. He leaned across the table, his voice low. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't. Her jaw clenched. It was his name, his file, you can't erase that. Listen carefully, Captain. His tone sharpened, slicing through the air. There are truths that don't belong to you. Walk away from this one. That's an order. Her chest burned. She wanted to scream, to demand, to shake the table until he admitted what she already knew. But his eyes, cold, unflinching, told her something louder than words. He wasn't warning her. He was threatening her. That night she couldn't breathe in her bunk. The barracks walls pressed too close. The murmurs of sleeping soldiers grated like static in her skull. She slipped out into the desert, rifle slung, boots crunching on gravel. She walked until the base lights were small behind her, until the silence was deep enough to swallow her whole. She pulled the file from her jacket, the words glowing faintly under her flashlight. Acid. Her brother hadn't vanished. He had been used. By them. Her knees buckled into the sand. She pressed the file to her chest, eyes burning, heart splitting open with something she hadn't felt in years. Betrayal. All this time she had blamed him, his choices, his stubbornness, his silence. But it hadn't been him, it had been them. The same uniform she wore, the same insignia stitched on her chest. They had circled his face, they had marked him, they had owned him. And now, by some twisted chain of orders and lies, they had sent her to follow his trail. Her throat closed. Was this mission ever about the enemy? Or was it always about erasing him? When she returned to base, dawn was bleeding across the horizon. She slipped into the barracks quietly, but the young sergeant stirred awake, eyes squinting. He sat up, whispering. Where were you? She froze, the file hidden against her ribs. Ma'am, I need to know. His voice was raw, desperate. That man in the photos, the name in the files, who is he? Her lips parted. For once, the silence was too heavy to carry. She whispered his name. "Alex." The sergeant frowned. "Your brother." She nodded, a single tear catching the edge of her jaw before she could stop it. The sergeant's face softened, confusion folding into sorrow. He reached for words, but none came. He just nodded once firmly as if to say, "I understand. I'm with you." For the first time since the photographs, she felt less alone. But she also knew something terrible. If the colonel suspected she had seen too much, then Alex wasn't the only one they'd erase. Why did she agree to this insertion? The question pressed against the inside of her skull as the rotor blades cut the Afghan night into jagged pieces of sound. The helicopter rattled and dipped, its belly heavy with gear, its benches lined with men who'd done this more times than they cared to count. But Lee Monroe wasn't thinking about them. She was thinking about herself and the voice that refused to go quiet in her chest. The pilot's clipped commands came through her headset, muffled by the vibration of the fuselage. Her hand rested on her rifle. Her breathing stayed slow, deliberate. Nobody looked at her, not really. That part didn't sting anymore. Groan used to being the one they spoke around, the one they tested with sideways glances, waiting to see if she'd crack under weight they couldn't imagine. She wouldn't. The helicopter lurched, tilting against an unseen gust. A nervous laugh rippled through the squad. One of the younger privates muttered a prayer under his breath, too quiet to draw ridicule but loud enough for Lee to hear. That small, human crack in his armor pierced her chest more than any insult could, because she remembered she'd been that young once. Knees shaking, mouth dry, wanting to be anywhere but here, but too proud to admit it. The green glow of night vision washed everything in ghostly light. Villages below looked like clusters of dying stars. She tightened the strap across her shoulder. Then the thought returned, sharp as glass. Why had she accepted this? Not because of the mission. The mission was clear: track, locate, and if possible extract intel from a figure who'd slipped through every net they had thrown across the region. Not because of the squad. They didn't trust her, not fully, and she didn't expect them to. Not even for the colonel, whose approval was a currency she no longer chased. It was because of her father. She could still see his weathered face the last time she'd spoken to him, years ago, when she was only a girl in a small town that had no patience for dreamers. He had sat on the porch, cigarette glowing faint in twilight, his voice carrying the kind of calm that made the world feel less cruel. "Dignity doesn't shout, Lee," he had told her. "It doesn't need to. It just stands." She had nodded back then, not fully understanding. Now, with the weight of her rifle and the endless desert stretching below, she understood too well. He hadn't been talking about war. He'd been talking about life, about enduring in silence when the world pushed you aside, about refusing to yield. The helicopter touched down hard, bouncing against the earth before settling. Dust swirled up, blinding, choking, sticking to her lips. Boots hit the ground one after another. She followed, rifle raised, body crouched low, eyes cutting through the darkness. The squad fanned out. Silence pressed in, broken only by the wind whispering across stone. They moved toward the shadowed compound ahead, their breath misting in the cold. Her heartbeat found its rhythm, not frantic but focused. The old ritual. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The target they were hunting wasn't just another ghost slipping through borders and shadows. Lee had read every line of the intel file, memorized every blurry image, every conflicting report. And buried within those details was something she hadn't dared voice aloud. This figure, the one they were risking their lives to catch, had once crossed paths with her. She remembered the night, the scream of mortars, the blur of fire, the narrow alley where she had crouched, wounded and alone, years before. A shadow had passed her then, a man with eyes like chipped stone who had spared her life when he didn't need to. He could have ended her. Instead, he had simply stared at her for a long, heavy second before vanishing into the smoke. And now she was back, hunting him. Her breath tightened at the thought. The squad leader motioned her to flank right. She moved, her boots sinking into sand. The compound loomed closer, its walls cracked and pitted, windows dark. She tried to steady her pulse, but the past bled into the present with every step. Did he remember her? Would he even recognize her now, hidden beneath armor and shadows? And more terrifying, what if he did? The squad reached the outer wall. They stacked, weapons angled, every movement precise. Lee slipped into position, her shoulder brushing the rough stone. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears, a hollow drum that felt louder than the wind. The leader signaled. A door cracked open. The squad spilled inside, swift and quiet. Lee followed, her rifle sweeping corners, breath held. Empty. Room after room, hollow walls, broken furniture, the smell of dust and rot. The compound was a grave, not a hideout. Frustration rippled through the squad, muttered curses bouncing against the silence. Lee said nothing. She walked deeper into the ruin, scanning, searching, her gut pulling her further in. Then she saw it. A mark scratched into the wall, small, faint, but unmistakable. The same symbol she had seen that night years ago, painted on the alley wall behind the man who had spared her. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a failed raid, it was a message. And she was the one it was meant for. The squad regrouped, voices low, sharp with disappointment. The leader spoke into his radio, requesting new coordinates. Lee stayed a step back, her eyes fixed on the symbol, her chest heavy. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Because if she did, she would have to explain why the mark mattered. And that meant telling them something she wasn't ready to share. Not yet. So she stayed quiet, rifle heavy in her hands, the night pressing close. The mission wasn't over, it was only beginning. But in the silence between orders, one truth rang louder than the wind. This was no coincidence. He wanted her to find him. Why had he left that mark for her? The question gnawed at Lee as they regrouped under the broken archway of the compound. The squad leader's voice crackled through the comms, reporting the empty rooms, the stale air, the nothingness. To everyone else, it was a failed lead. Another night wasted, but to Lee, it was a summons. Her eyes returned again and again to the symbol etched into the wall. It was crude, hurried, carved with something sharp against the stone, but she knew its meaning. She had memorized every angle, every scar of it, burned into her brain years ago. He hadn't just wanted her to see it, he had wanted her to remember. And she did. But how could she tell them? The men around her didn't want mystery, they wanted closure. A fight, a body, a mission wrapped up in bullets and sand. They wouldn't understand why her chest felt heavier now than before they'd even left the base. The squad leader, Ramirez, cursed under his breath. His patience was thinning. His trust in her had never been more than conditional, and this wild goose chase in the cold desert was testing it further. "We move," he ordered, voice flat, decisive. "No trail, no signs, it's burned. We regroup at the secondary point." Lee nodded, wordless. Her boots dragged just a little as they pulled back, leaving the compound behind. But in her mind the mark followed her. Each step echoed like an unanswered question. The desert stretched wide under the thinning night. The horizon began to pale, the first edge of dawn bleeding across jagged hills. Lee breathed in the cold, metallic air, every inhale scraping her lungs. The world looked different in this half-light, less certain, more fragile. She tightened her grip on her rifle. Why now, why her? They trekked for miles, silence broken only by crunching boots and clipped radio checks. The younger private, the one who had prayed in the chopper, lagged slightly behind. His lips moved soundlessly, still mouthing fragments of prayer. Lee caught his eye once. He looked away quickly, embarrassed. But she recognized the fear. She had carried that same weight at his age, cloaked it under layers of determination until she could no longer tell where fear ended and willpower began. It wasn't weakness, it was humanity. She wanted to tell him that, but her throat locked. Words had never been her strength, not in moments like these. So instead she offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. His shoulders eased, just a little. They reached the secondary site, another ruin of stone and shadow. Ramirez signaled for a halt. The squad dropped packs, checked weapons, settled into uneasy rest. Lee sat apart, her back against a fractured wall, scanning the horizon through her scope. The morning sun clawed higher, casting long, skeletal shadows. That's when she saw it. A shimmer, a flicker, not natural, something deliberate on the ridge beyond. Her breath caught and she adjusted her scope, focusing tight. There, a scrap of fabric, red, caught on the edge of a rock. To anyone else it would look like nothing. Desert detritus, a trick of the wind, but to her it was another message. She remembered the same color flashing once through the smoke years ago, the scarf the man had worn across his face the night he'd let her live. Her hands trembled. She steadied them against the rifle. This wasn't chance. It couldn't be. He was drawing her out, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, and the others didn't even know. She could tell Ramirez. She could point it out, frame it as intel, lead the squad forward. But a deeper instinct warned her against it. If this was meant for her, bringing them would only turn it into a trap. She thought of her father again, his voice steady and low. Dignity doesn't shout, it endures, it chooses. Her choice now was silence. She lowered the scope, blinking hard, her heart still pounding. She didn't say a word to Ramirez or to the men reloading beside him. She let the red scrap stay her secret, for now. The squad moved again at first light, their shadows stretching thin across the sand. Hours blurred, the desert swallowing sound, thought, hope. Lee's legs ached, her throat burned, her body longed for rest, but her mind stayed sharp, anchored to the image of that red fabric. Each mile dragged her closer to something inevitable. She could feel it, as sure as the pull of gravity. By nightfall, they reached another valley. The sun bled out over the ridges, painting the rocks in bruised colors. The squad dug in, setting a perimeter. Ramirez barked assignments. Men moved like clockwork, efficient and tired. Lee climbed higher, scanning from an outcrop, the wind cold against her skin. And there it was again. A reflection this time. A shard of glass or metal deliberately placed, catching the dying light. She froze, breath shallow, eyes locked, her chest hollowed. He was close. But why hadn't he revealed himself? Why these signals, these whispers in the desert? What game was he playing? She crouched, pressing her forehead briefly against her rifle stock. Her pulse hammered. The squad below had no idea. To them, this was just another barren valley, another night in hostile ground. They didn't know that someone out there was watching her, waiting for her, calling her forward. And still, she didn't tell them. Not yet. Because deep inside, she wasn't sure what terrified her more, that he would appear or that he wouldn't. The stars spread wide above, cold and endless. Lee stayed awake long after the others drifted into uneasy sleep, her eyes scanning the ridges, her mind circling the same questions. What did he want from her? Why now? And when the time came, would she have the strength to face him? The desert gave no answers, only silence. But Lee knew, with a clarity that hollowed her bones, that the silence wouldn't last. Not this time. What woke her first, the sound or the silence? Lee wasn't sure. One moment her body was locked in restless half-sleep against the stone outcrop. The next, her eyes were open, pupils dilated, senses sharpened as if a wire had been pulled taut inside her chest. The camp below breathed in its usual rhythm, men shifting in their sleep, the faint rustle of fabric, the metallic creak of weapons resting against walls. But something was wrong. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones. She raised her rifle slowly, the stock snug against her cheek, and scanned the ridgeline. For long seconds, nothing. Just rock and shadow, the desert stretching endlessly in quiet. But then, movement. A figure, barely a silhouette against the moon's pale glow, still, watching. Her lungs locked. It was him. She didn't need to see his face to know. The stillness, the way he stood against the night, unmoving, patient, as if the desert itself bowed around him. Her heart thudded so hard she thought it might wake the men below. She had imagined this moment for years, built it in fragments and dreams. And now here he was, not in the blur of memory, not in a grainy file photograph, alive, watching her. She lifted her scope, breath shallow. The glass brought him closer, sharp enough to burn into her eyes. His scarf was still there, the red fabric now dulled and frayed by time. His shoulders were broader, heavier. But the eyes, the same stone-carved eyes that had spared her once, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her grip tighten. Her finger hovered near the trigger. She could end it now. End the mission, end the chase, prove to the squad and to herself that she was more than the doubts whispered about her. But she couldn't. Because beneath the weight of the rifle, another truth pressed harder. He wasn't here to kill her. If he had wanted to, he could have. Easily. The way he had that night years ago. So why appear at all? Her throat went dry. She lowered the scope just slightly, just enough to meet his gaze without the glass between them. And then he moved, slowly, deliberately, one step back, then another. And then he was gone, swallowed by the ridge as if the desert had reclaimed him. She exhaled sharply, chest tight. She could tell Ramirez, wake the squad, lead them up the ridge in pursuit, but the thought turned sour in her gut. They wouldn't understand. To them he was just a target, a name on a list, a shadow to be erased. To her he was something else, something unfinished, unresolved. So she stayed silent again. The hours crawled until dawn. The squad stirred, unaware of what had passed above them in the night. Ramirez checked maps, grunted orders. The men stretched stiff limbs, muttered about rations, cursed the cold. Lee kept her eyes low, her face unreadable. But inside, everything had shifted. She wasn't just chasing him anymore. She was answering him. The march began again under the rising sun, their boots grinding over loose rock. Heat shimmered early, heavy and oppressive. Lee's body ached with each step, but her mind kept circling back to that brief exchange of glances, that silent acknowledgement. She knew what it meant now. This wasn't about capture, it wasn't about intel, it wasn't even about war. It was about her. The squad descended into another valley, its floor choked with scrub and stone. Ramirez called a halt, spreading men into a loose perimeter. Lee drifted to the edge, her scope sweeping the ridges out of habit. Then she saw it. Another mark, not scratched into stone this time, but arranged with deliberate care. Small rocks stacked in a formation she recognized instantly. Her pulse quickened. A sign. And not just any sign. A signal from him placed where only someone searching with intent would notice. For her. Her mouth went dry. This was no longer coincidence. He was guiding her. The realization was both terrifying and electrifying, because if he wanted her dead, she would be. He had chosen something else instead, a dialogue, a game, a summons she couldn't ignore. Her mind flashed back again to her father's words on that porch years ago. Dignity doesn't shout, it simply stands. This man, her shadow, her unfinished story, was standing now, not in speeches, not in threats, in silence, in patience, in the simple act of leaving marks for her to find. Her throat tightened. Was this dignity, or was it a trap painted in the colors of memory? She didn't know. The squad carried on, oblivious. Ramirez was focused on coordinates, his brow furrowed, his jaw tight. The others swapped dry jokes, traded complaints. Only Lee carried the weight of something unspoken, pressing heavier with every mile. By nightfall, exhaustion set in. The men dropped into uneasy rest again, muttering prayers, pulling blankets tight. Lee climbed another ridge, settling into watch, her rifle across her knees. The desert was vast, silent. Stars bled across the sky like shards of glass, and for a long time there was nothing, just wind, cold and endless. Then a sound. Soft, faint, carried on the breeze. A whistle. Her chest seized. She froze, every muscle rigid. It was the same three-note whistle she had heard years ago, echoing through the smoke of that alley just before he vanished. Her breath caught, a sharp gasp in the night. It wasn't memory, it wasn't coincidence. He was here, closer than ever. And this time Lee knew the choice would not be his alone, it would be hers. What would they say if she vanished? That was the thought that stalked Lee as the whistle faded into the desert wind. If she broke from the perimeter, if she followed that sound, Ramirez would brand her reckless. The squad would call her unstable. And maybe they'd be right. But how long could she keep pretending she didn't hear it? She stayed crouched on the ridge, the night pressing cold into her bones. The others below were drifting deeper into sleep. Even Ramirez's packing had slowed, his outline now just a shadow against the embers of a dying fire. It would be so easy. Slip into the darkness, follow the call only she could hear. Her hands shook as she gripped the rifle tighter. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't rational. But when had the desert ever cared for logic? The whistle returned, softer this time, fainter, as if whoever made it was walking away. Her pulse spiked. She couldn't let him slip through her fingers again. With a slow exhale, Lee pushed herself to her feet. She moved like a shadow herself, each step measured, each breath controlled. Down the backside of the ridge, away from the glow of camp, into the open mouth of the desert. No one called out, no alarms, the squad was oblivious. The silence of her departure cut deeper than any reprimand could have. She walked for what felt like hours, guided by memory, instinct, and the occasional whisper of sound on the breeze. The desert was alive in its own way, rocks shifting, insects stirring, the low howl of wind through cracks of stone. Every noise made her flinch. Every shadow could have been him. But he didn't appear, not yet. Instead, he left her signs, a trail of faint markers, subtle but deliberate, stones stacked in threes, a scrap of red thread tangled in thorn, a circle drawn in sand, already half erased by wind. She followed, her chest tight, each discovery cutting deeper into the mystery. Why her? Why now? The night stretched long. Her legs ached, her lips cracked, her mind swirled with exhaustion and adrenaline. Yet she pressed forward, compelled by something larger than orders, larger than fear. When she finally saw the firelight, her knees almost buckled. It was faint, tucked into a hollow between two jagged cliffs. A single flame shielded from wind, small, controlled, deliberate. Her breath stuttered. She crouched low, rifle steady, every sense sharpened. A figure sat by the fire. Him. There was no mistaking it now. The scarf, the shoulders, the stillness carved into his posture as if he had been waiting for her all along. Her throat tightened. Her finger brushed the trigger but stopped. This wasn't an ambush. There were no guards, no squad, no weapon raised toward her. Just a man sitting in silence by a flame too small to warm anyone. Lee's heart hammered. Why hadn't he run? Why hadn't he attacked? And then, for the first time, she heard his voice. You came. 2 words, low, rough, worn by years of sand and silence. Her rifle wavered. She forced her arms steady. Why? The words scraped from her throat, harsh, broken. He lifted his gaze to her. Even in the dim glow of firelight, his eyes were unmistakable. Cold but not cruel, hard but not empty. Because, he said slowly, as if tasting each syllable, I owe you. Her chest constricted. She blinked hard, shaken. You spared me once, she whispered. You could have killed me. He nodded, the faintest movement. And now I let you choose. Her breath faltered. The rifle grew heavier in her hands. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had expected a chase, a fight, something she could contain within orders and rules of engagement. Not this. Not words, not choice. The fire cracked softly. Wind whistled low through the cliffs. His eyes never left hers. Lee's mind split open with noise. Her squad waiting, Ramirez's distrust, her father's voice on the porch. the years of carrying silence like armor. And here in the desert's heart, the man who had haunted her memory sat before her, unarmed, offering her something she didn't know how to name. "Why me?" Her voice shook now. A pause, a long one, then his answer simple, unflinching. "Because you remember." The words hit her harder than any bullet. She staggered a half-step back, the desert spinning. Remember. She did. Not just him, not just that night, but all of it, the weight of being invisible, the sting of dismissal, the relentless push to prove herself in silence, and the truth that she had carried every mile. Dignity doesn't shout, it endures. Her arms trembled under the weight of her rifle. And in that moment, Lee Monroe realized the mission wasn't about killing him. It was about finding herself. But the desert wasn't merciful. Behind her, faint and sharp, came the crack of a branch, the sound of boots. The squad. They had followed. And now the choice she had been given wasn't hers alone anymore. What would they see first, the man by the fire or the rifle trembling in her hands? That thought crashed through Lee's mind the instant she heard the boots behind her. She didn't turn, couldn't. Her gaze stayed locked on the figure across the flames. His eyes told her everything he already knew. The crunch of gravel drew closer. Ramirez's low growl carried through the night. Monroe stepped back. Her throat closed. The squad spread into a crescent around her, rifles raised, barrels glinting in firelight. The men looked tired but alert, the kind of focus born of repetition. Targets, orders, execute. They didn't hesitate. But Lee did. Ramirez's voice hardened. Move now. The man by the fire didn't flinch. He stayed seated still, his scarf stirring in the breeze, as if none of it mattered, as if he'd been waiting for this moment too. Lee's pulse roared in her ears. She could feel Ramirez's stare drilling into the back of her helmet. The squad saw only one thing, a target in the desert, an objective to close. They didn't see the mark on the wall, the red scrap, the whistle, the memory of smoke and mercy. They didn't see the years that had led her here. But she did. Her arms trembled harder now. Her rifle was raised but not steady. Her finger hovered over the trigger guard, useless. Every second stretched taut. The man's voice cut through the silence, calm, steady. Do you tell them, soldier, or do you stay quiet again? Her breath hitched. Ramirez snapped, quiet down. His rifle lifted higher, finger tensing. The squad mirrored him. One twitch, one spark, and it would be over. Lee's mind spun. She thought of her father, dignity doesn't shout. She thought of the younger privates' whispered prayers in the helicopter. She thought of herself, standing alone at briefing tables, invisible until someone needed a scapegoat. Her silence had always been her weapon, but now it felt like her cage. She lowered her rifle. The squad froze. A ripple of disbelief ran through them. Ramirez's voice sharpened to a blade. Monroe, what the hell are you doing? Her chest heaved. Her throat ached. She couldn't form the words, not yet. The man by the fire rose slowly, his movements unhurried, deliberate. His shadow stretched long across the sand. For the first time, he spoke to Ramirez and the others, though his gaze never left Lee. She remembers, do you? The words landed heavy, confusing the squad. They shifted, uncertain. Ramirez barked, drop the act, you're done, hands up or... But the man just shook his head. You think this is about you? His voice carried weight, a calm that unsettled more than shouting ever could. It is. Lee swallowed hard. Her voice, when it finally broke free, was raw, scraped thin. He's not here to fight. The squad's eyes snapped to her. Ramirez's narrowed with fury. Not your call, Monroe. And maybe it was. But as she stood there, rifle slack in her hands, Lee realized something else. Maybe none of this had ever been her call. Not the missions, not the doubts, not the silence she had been forced to carry. But this moment, this choice, was hers. Her father's words rang again, clearer now than ever. Dignity doesn't shout. It stands. So she stood between the squad and the man, her body rigid, her breath shaking, a barrier. Gasps rippled behind her. Ramirez's fury ignited. "Monroe, stand down, that's an order." Her chest rose and fell. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it was steady. "Not this time." The desert seemed to hold its breath. The man by the fire took one more step forward, stopping just short of her. His eyes flicked once past her toward Ramirez, then back to her, approval, recognition, something she couldn't name. Ramirez's rifle quivered, rage and confusion warring on his face. The younger private, the one who prayed, lowered his weapon first. His whisper cut the silence. "She's right." Others hesitated, shifted, some rifles dipped. Ramirez barked, "Stand tall, don't you dare." But his words faltered as doubt spread through his men like wildfire. Lee felt it in her bones. The balance was shifting. Not because she shouted, because she endured. The man's voice softened, almost a whisper now, but clear. "It begins with one." And Lee understood. She wasn't just choosing silence anymore. She was choosing to stand. The fire crackled low, casting shadows across their faces. The night pressed closer. No gunfire, no chaos, just a standoff woven from choice, memory, and the weight of dignity itself. But the desert had never been safe ground, and Lee knew the stillness couldn't last. Not here, not now. She didn't speak as they gathered around her. Not immediately. She stood by the shattered wall, helmet tucked under her arm, boots heavy with dust. The silence clung to her like another layer of armor, but it wasn't the silence of defeat. It was the kind that made people lean in, waiting. What could she possibly say after everything? After the long march through fire, betrayal, and grief? After the names left unspoken and the faces she'd never see again? One of the younger soldiers finally asked the question that weighed on everyone's chest. Was it worth it? Her eyes softened, tracing the horizon where smoke curled against a fatting sky. The ruins before them still whispered with echoes of the fight, and she thought of the man who had trusted her when no one else did, of the boy who sang quietly under his breath before dawn, of the mother who would never know her daughter's name but would live because of her choice. She didn't answer the question directly. Instead, she let the silence stretch, so heavy it became its own kind of truth. Then finally her voice broke through, low, measured, almost fragile. "Dignity," she said, "isn't about shouting. It isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about standing when standing feels impossible. It's about enduring when everything in you wants to collapse." The soldiers shifted, some lowering their heads. One of them wiped a streak of dirt from his cheek, though it didn't hide the tears. She placed her helmet on the ground. "You don't fight for applause. You don't fight so the world remembers your name. You fight so that someone else gets the chance to live, even if they'll never know you gave them that chance." Her words didn't echo, they landed, quiet like stones sinking into deep water. No one spoke for a long time, because they all understood. Later that night, when the fires burned low and the camp settled into uneasy sleep, she sat alone. She could still hear the crack of rifles, the whispers of radio static, the sound of her own heartbeat in those silent seconds before pulling a trigger. She could still feel the weight of the choice that had changed the tide. And yet there was peace in her chest, not triumph, not relief, just peace. Because dignity had no need for noise, no need for banners or medals. It simply endured, quiet, unwavering. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the silence settle around her like a cloak. Somewhere in the distance, the first bird sang into the smoke-stained dawn. And though the world might never know her full story, those who stood with her would never forget. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It simply stands. And it endures.